Welcome back everybody, episode 10 in this run up to Sydney Knife Show. During the week I've been spending a lot of time with this first prototype, and now it's time to move on to prototype 2. I've made a few little changes to the CAD model and updated the cam, so I'm going to jump onto the CNC and get things going straight away. What I didn't show in last week's video is that I also spent a bunch of time preparing material for this week's work on the CNC. I've surface ground some steel and I've got the material ready for the handles. I also milled out the lock bar and the back spacer, so all the parts are ready to go. I plan on doing the blades first. They'll be ready to heat treat and I'll be able to grind them while other parts are on the CNC. There's not a lot of time before Sydney Knife Show, only a few more weekends, so I'm trying to optimize my time the best that I can. I'm using the same work holding method to do these blades as I did previously. There were a couple of small little tweaks in the mechanism area when I milled it out that need to be fixed up, and I'll test this out on prototype 2. Well, first part of the day and I've made a mistake already. I'll take you through what I've done and why it happened, and see if I can explain exactly what went wrong. I've had to surface grind a new piece of steel so that I can make a replacement blade. The first one I made a mistake with my height offset. So as you can see, the detent hole there has quite a large chamfer around it, and when I was spotting the detent, the chamfer went too deep, and now that means that the blade is basically unusable. I continued to do the rest of the operations, and that allowed me to double check my work for fitting with the new code and new machining against my original handle for prototype 1. So it wasn't a total loss. Now, what went wrong? I changed the height offset so that it's relative to the top surface of my steel rather than the surface at the bottom of the vice jaw there. The reason for that is that the steel, after I surface grind it, has a small variation in thickness, and I wanted that detent hole to be spotted without going too deep. Now what went wrong is that I made the decision to do that change and set up my offset here. In the cam, I made a bunch of other changes for the mechanism, but I forgot to change the work coordinate. So when I drilled the first hole, it only went in a partial depth. I had the brilliant idea to just change the work offset by a few millimeters so that the hole would continue to drill through. I don't have any relative locations that I could use as a reference point, so I kind of figured that if I took the stock out, reset the Z height, and then went back, the hole would be in a different spot, so drilling it again wouldn't work. What I should have done is just gone back and posted the code with the coordinate system fixed, and that would have been fine. I don't know why I didn't think of that. It was a silly thing to do. With that offset, I offset it by more than the thickness of the steel, just to make sure that those holes would drill all the way through, and left it like that. Later, as I was machining the other features, when it came to the detent, because the offset was further down than what it should have been, the spotting drill just went too deep, and that's where the mistake was. So I've gone back to the computer and changed my offset, and now I'm ready to make another blade. I will be able to come back to this blade and surface grind it down a bit further and make a slender version of the prototype. The problem is, having already made the back spacer, I won't be able to thin that down as easily now that it's made. I'll be able to come back once I know, and once I've finished surface grinding this blade and I know the final thickness, I'll be able to do a back spacer that is relative to that thickness. So it's not the end of the world. It's now Sunday. Yesterday I machined all the blades and I managed to heat treat them as well. Having done more than one blade, it's meant that I could run an experiment with my nitrogen purging. I did one blade with a nitrogen purge, the other blade I did with a talcum powder addition. I'm going to show you the results, come back later in the video and see which one was which. Feels like I've been in the workshop for hours already and I haven't even started running the CNC yet. I've been setting up tools so that I can change from the steel and work in the titanium for the handles now. There's a few more things that I need to do maintenance wise. I need to refill my whey oil container before I start machining. If that gets too low, the alarm will go off. If the alarm goes off when you're halfway through a machining operation, it's very annoying to sit there having it blaring away. Rather than have that happen, I'll fill it up before I get going. I'm using Hengstifer's whey oil to match the coolant. I figure that's the best option. The placement of this lubrication system is a little bit frustrating underneath the electrical cabinet there, so I've got to use this small funnel to be able to get it to work. As you can see, it's a bit annoying to fill up in that position. I made a little bit of a spill and mess, so I'll clean that up before I do anything else. Now that that's all full, I'll be able to start machining. I got all set up for machining and got my raw stock installed, and I had another thought. So I'm going to talk about the lock bars for a second. I tried a few different methods of cutting them out in this part of the fixture. This one was one that I tried with the new method. If you have a look at the finish here along the edge, it's really terrible. It was not a good result at all. The lock bar was moving up and down. I could see it and flexing as it was machining that part and left a terrible finish. With these ones, the tab there will need to be ground off before I can fit it up into my raw stock. But the finish on these other areas is really excellent. It's a much better finish than the new method that I tried. So I'm going to keep with this method and I'm going to clean up those areas of the lock bar where the tabs were before I can fit it into here. Leave the CNC alone for a little bit longer and get back onto some manual processes. I've just finished milling these two interior parts of the handle. I thought I'd do a little bit of review of some of those tolerance issues that I talked about in the previous video. The main one from the previous video was the stop pin on this interior side. With my new tolerance levels, this one is really tight, exactly how I want it to be. Push fit like the first one. The pins at the back are roughly the same. I want them to be able to be pushed through but not necessarily as tight as the stop pins, so that's gone really well. The first time I ran these parts on prototype 1, I ran it with a slightly used end mill. So I was guessing a little bit for the tolerance. I tightened up the holes on the pivot. And I think perhaps it could go a tiny little bit further. I want it not quite as tight as the stop pin, but tighter than these ones at the back. I'm going to quickly jump into Fusion 360 and adjust some of these tolerances. Change the end mill to a new one so that the process remains the same. And then I'll run prototype 3 handles. Here's the big reveal. Which one did you think was the one with the nitrogen purge and which one was with the talcum powder? If you guessed the one on the left was the nitrogen purge, you'd be correct. This one was the one with the talcum powder. I marked the talcum powder one with 3 little scratches so that I could tell which one it was. So it's not a very scientific experiment. The talcum powder one definitely released easier from the stainless steel, I'd like to give the talcum powder a go with the Magnacut. If you saw the last video, I had some problems with the foil packet sticking to the blades. Well, it's the end of a long weekend spent in the workshop. I think everything's gone really well. Quite a productive weekend. Got some blades milled and heat treated, and that was a big blocking point for getting ready for the knife show up in Sydney. I've made a good start on the inside of the handles for 2 of the knives. I've been dialing in the tolerance for these and nailing down the process a little bit more. One thing I'd like to switch up is that I've been making part by part so far. As I was getting started, I was machining one hole and boring it out to a particular tolerance. Then later on I'd come back and do the other side of the handle and then bore it out. You can tell the difference in end mill wear between the first part and the same features on the second part. I'd like to change the process that I'm using so that I'm doing the same features on both parts in sequence so that the tolerance stays pretty much the same. I'm not having to adjust after machining all the features in the first handle. So that's it for this weekend. If you haven't been following along, jump back. There's a lot of episodes to go through now and see the progress from prototype to a small little prototype production run. One last thing, don't be surprised if next week this beard is a lot shorter. I noticed grinding the blade in one of the earlier episodes that the respirator I use doesn't have the best fit when my beard is this long. So I'm going to take the step before I grind those blades to give it a good trim.